It is still Friday, the 10th of May 2021, and I am reading The Laird and the Lady. It's a novel by Joan Marshall Grant. She wrote books of her previous incarnations, but this one is her one fiction book. It is the story about a meeting at a romantic French chateau, and it is Marylda and Rowan who meet, and we are now Marylda. Marylda and Rowan. Chapter 10 is entitled Nightingales Sang. For Dr. Chavan, a visit to the chateau was an event, even in the absence of the family. Honorine, whose opinion he had come to respect when they acted as colleagues in the resistance, had informed him that more than a blow on the head was wrong with his patient. He kept up a flow of reminiscence, broken only by polite interjections from Rowan and Marylda, except when it was necessary to give his verdict on the first serving of each course and enlarge the compliments which he knew Torbayon would relay to Honorine at the second helping. Marylda was glad he was there, for it was easier than being alone with Rowan until she was sure her facade of indifference could be sustained. But need he eat quite so slowly? Was it necessary to speculate on the exact size of the clove of garlic that had been inserted beside the bone of the gigot? Her impatience was replaced by a fresh anxiety. If the doctor departed too early, Rowan might decide they could leave this afternoon. Tonight she might be alone in a hotel while he drove his own car towards Calais. Tomorrow there would be the sea between them. She pressed their guest to a third crab flambé, which he accepted after protesting that at his age he could have earned more respect for his digestion. He should have learned more respect for his digestion. She saw Rowan frown, so he was so impatient to get away that he grudged the poor little man his lunch. She toyed with a segment of pancake, while her left hand clenched in her lap until the nails indented the palm. After coffee and yellow chartreuse, Dr. Chavan insisted that he must now make the decision as to whether he could still consider her a patient. He seemed to take it for granted that Rowan would stay in the room, until noticing her embarrassment, he quickly suggested that he would prefer to see her upstairs. He took her blood pressure, sounded her heart, shone a small electric torch in her eyes, assured himself that there was no tenderness on her head or back, that the wound required no further attention. Madame has had a most fortunate escape. It is a loss to France, and I must reluctantly admit that there is no longer any reason to prevent you accompanying your husband to England. He made a small depreciatory cough. There is perhaps another matter on which you would like my advice? For a moment Marylda thought he had seen through the deception, that he was offering himself as a benevolent father-confessor. "No," she said, "there's nothing. It is very kind of you, but there's nothing you can do for me now." He smiled. "One understands that it cannot be my pleasant duty to give what help may be required. That will be for some other doctor in the new year." This is too much, thought Marylda wildly. What would he say if I told him I was suffering from virginity, not pregnancy? "I'm not having a baby," she said flatly. "Many women do not conceive in the first few months," he said consolingly. "I must tell your husband not to worry too much. These things occur in their own good time." "Oh, for God's sake, don't do that." Then, seeing she had offended him, she added, "You see, my husband is not fond of children. He thinks there are too many people in the world already. He would be angry with me if you mentioned the subject." The doctor made a sound indicating a nice blend of sympathy and disapproval. "You must have the patience to wean him from these wrong-headed opinions." "If the human appeal is not enough, you must remind him of his duty to his country. Tell him to consider how France already suffers from the tragic fall in her birth rate." Sorry. She pressed his hand, hoping he would take it both as a sign of dismissal and a token that she was so deeply moved by his sympathy that she could not express her gratitude in words. He bowed, kissed her hand, blew his nose with violence, for she had moved him to tears, and left the room, closing the door with an exaggerated care. Marylda felt inclined to stay in her room until dinner time. At least Rowan could not be so boorish as to go without consulting her, or so inconsiderate as to expect her to leave without adequate time to pack. But this attitude was rank cowardice. The sooner they parted, the sooner she could go back to being the competent young woman who had trained herself not to be dependent on anyone. The Marylda who could buy anything she wanted, and was too sensible to ask for what was beyond the range of money. She applied powder and fresh lipstick, filled her cigarette case, and reached the courtyard in time to overhear Rowan say to the doctor, "It's a great relief to know she's all right. No restrictions, can do anything she likes. At least he need not have sounded so horribly glad about it. If he wanted to say, 'Thank God I needn't stay cooped up with a woman who nearly ran over me and has been an intolerable nuisance ever since,' he could have concealed his feelings. If she spoke to him before recovering her temper, she would probably be excessively rude, and he was probably sufficiently intelligent to know that no woman bothers to insult a man in whom she takes no interest. She ran down the steps that led her to the lower terrace, and realized too late that there was no escape from there. Last time she sat under the bougainvillea, Rowan had given her a wedding ring. She twisted it on her finger. You would be the first lady of Reno if you went there and said you'd worn a ring only a week, not even long enough to make a pale circle against your suntan. She had him calling for her. Let him call. If he wants to tell me the exciting news that we are no longer chained together, he could shout till his lungs burst, or search for me until his feet are so blistered that blood runs out of the eyelet holes of his shoes. Rowan appeared at the head of the steps. "Oh, there you are," he said. "I've been looking for you everywhere." He sat down on the stone bench beside her and stared at his shoes as though they were of supreme interest. "The doctor says you're all right. Nice little chap. Gave him a couple of $1,000 for his hospital. Wouldn't take a fee. Very decent of him." She restrained herself from remarking that $2,000 must have seemed cheap if it meant release from intolerable boredom. "We can go to Paris tomorrow," he added. "Your car is running quite well." "You wouldn't prefer to take your car?" He glanced at her as though startled. "Oh, no. Duncan's thoroughly reliable. He'll have got my wire and will deal with it in his own time. He's a bit vague, but you'll find he's no fool when you get to know him." "If I ever meet him, which is somewhat unlikely," said Marylda, hoping she sounded effectively indifferent. "Not meet Duncan? Of course you will. He's my cousin, and his place, Dalloch, marches with Cloud." He became more vehement. "You'll like Duncan. Bound to. Damn good chap." There was a long silence. "It's been a tricky 6 days," says Rowan. "Tricky for me, I mean." "Has it?" said Marylda. "It seemed very pleasant. The weather has been perfect, and the chateau is really charming." He ceased contemplating his shoes and looked directly at her. His expression was a little severe, as though he were trying to bring himself to scold her. "Darling, I know you're very innocent, and, mind you, that's only as it should be, but you do try a chap a bit high." His voice took on a new note, as though a grievance demanded airing. "It's all very well with me, though I didn't find it any too easy, but it's lucky for you that one has a certain kind of background. Manners maketh man, and all that, you know?" He blushed. After all, one shouldn't quote the motto of one's school, even though one had belatedly learned the range of its implications. Not all men have been to Winchester, and foreigners are notorious for taking unfair advantage. Innocence was all very well, but Marylda must be told that snakes exist in grass. In future, you've got to be a lot more careful," he said sententiously. "I nearly kissed you on the terrace last night. You've got to recognize that the combination of you and a moon and a couple of nightingales which were almost the last straw, is more than most men could take without reverting to the primitive. Marylda was speechless. Was it possible that he hadn't realized what she had been desperately trying to do? He took her silence for a sign of mute dismay at the inexplicable lusts of the male. He exploded. "You didn't even lock your door. Was that really fair? After all, a woman should have some consideration." "But why did you pretend that I meant nothing to you?" "Nothing at all," she said. "Why did you make me think that you were bored? Why did you take no notice?" He threw away the leaf he had been systematically tearing to shreds. For some extraordinary reason, he was required to explain something which even to her must have been glaringly obvious. Though not from personal experience, he understood that women are unpredictable. He would use small exact words, so that there could be no misunderstanding. "That officious little doctor, not that he didn't mean well, told me you were to have no excitements, no worries of any kind. How could I ask you to marry me when either we'd both have plenty of excitement, or else you'd be worried at being in a hellish, awkward situation?" The moon and the sun shone at the same time. Nightingales sang with thrushes. The castle became a bower beyond the grass of thorn. "Are you by any chance proposing?" inquired Marylda. "But of course. Surely you knew I fell in love with you that first night, when you went to sleep on my lap?" "No, darling, I didn't. I thought you were going away tomorrow." He regarded her with awe. "You have a lot to learn, my darling, and I will not again be sufficiently a fool to behave as though I felt chivalrous." There was nothing in the disarrangement of the pillows which even Honorine's discerning eye could find inadequate. Marylda and Rowan had even the courtesy to oversleep, so that she could take vicarious joy from the sight of her head on his shoulder. Honorine drew the curtains very quietly, leaving the sun to wake them to their new day. So that was chapter 10, and chapter 11 is Night Without Armor. Have a nice Friday night.